And welcome to the next edition of and session on the technological transformation of the financial services industry in India. My name is Ramachandran. I'm a professor of practice and vice dean at the Jindal School of Banking and Finance. It is my pleasure to have a conversation with Mr. Chandra Mohan Malladi. I will introduce him shortly, but I wanted to launch straight into the growth and the historical perspective of how the banking and financial services industry has grown over the last 30 years. Since independence in India, the banks have been nationalized. There were about 20 odd banks, along with the 17 banks that were under the State Bank of India branding. And since liberalization in 1991, the government allowed foreign banks to set up shops in India, and which also enabled not only competition with local banks, but also truly enhanced the customer servicing, product offerings, and the operational efficiencies of financial institutions in India. Along with that, the insurance companies have also been playing a very active role in collaborating with foreign insurance companies in making sure that they have a very significant role to play in the Indian economy and the Indian citizens' quality of life. All that being said, what has actually perpetuated these significant growth is technology. Since the mid-1990s, when the internet boom started, the expectations from the consumers have also grown, but also the ability for the insurance companies, the banking financial institutions, and the non-banking financial institutions have actually been tremendously improved, their ability to improve their efficiencies through technological innovations, whether it is through online internet banking or through mobile banking more recently. The ability for the institutions to really pivot from their old traditional banking platforms to new ways of interacting with customers and consumers it has exponentially grown. Having said that, just a quick historical perspective, we'll get into more of that. In the last, I would say 10 years or so, 10, 15 years, the ability for institutions, financial institutions, to whether it's pension funds or insurance companies or others, for them to truly leverage the technological prowess has been magnified with the use of these new form technologies, including fintech and blockchain and artificial intelligence and others. And then more recently, with the introduction of robotic process automation in the back-end BPO or the business process automation capabilities, it has catapulted our technological industry, our fintech startup community, as well as our own institutions to be able to perform on par or even exceed what the financial institutions can do in India. So that's a kind of the backdrop in terms of what we wanted to address during this session, in making sure that the audience, many of them are going to be students as well, are able to understand how these institutions, financial institutions, have actually leveraged and been able to use these technologies to their benefit, while at the same time being able to compete effectively with these new age fintech startup companies who are able to not only make a push in the space that the traditional banks, the State Bank of India and the Punjab National Banks and others have been playing, but also been able to make an inroad into our own psyche, whether it is the new age Paytms or others. They have significantly made an inroad into mobile payment technologies and other areas of technological innovations. So with that said, I want to introduce my panel, Mr. Chandra Mohan Malladi. He's the head of banking and financial services and the entire enterprise digital platforms for Tata Consultancy services. So he has been leading the business operations and technology transformation programs for his clients. So he has been in the industry for more than 25 years, and he has been involved in conceptualization and driving new business units and services, both in terms of building technology and business platforms. And he understands this world of banking and banking platform implementations and establishing KYC or know your customer solutions, digital lending solutions, and such. So it is my absolute pleasure to invite Mr. Malladi to the panel. Unfortunately, we had a gentleman, Mr. Nikesh Lalchandani, who could not be present today. He's based out of Sydney, but unfortunately could not make it at the last minute. So he sent his apologies. And so we'll have a conversation with Mr. Malladi for the next 45 minutes. So welcome, Mr. Malladi, and it's our pleasure to have you on board.
Thank you, Ram. Hope I'm audible.
Yes.
Yeah, and good afternoon to all the participants in India, and the good night or good evening or good morning, whatever the rest of the geographies you are in. And it's a pleasure to participate in this forum to share some of the industry experiences related to the banking evolution. Well, probably, Ram, the way I plan to organize this session is to look at the entire the theme behind the banking financial services to become a technology savvy or a tech savvy, and why it is important for a country like India or any other global country in the world to adopt the technology changes which are coming up on time to time. And then probably we'll touch upon the key pillars or the themes on which the entire digital adoption and the digital disruption that is taking place, and then how the citizens and the customers and the enterprises are able to adopt these digital disruptions happening quite fast now. So we can see that the IT industry in the last 30 years has been just taken over in 3 years. And I think the progress in last 3 years is as good as the progress in the last 30 years. And it's going to be much more faster and agile. And on looking at that, how exactly, the technology, I think that's a theme, and also the kind of evolution that is taking place in India and the global marketplaces, how exactly the technology adoption takes place. We can touch upon those aspects of it. So I think, you can suggest the way you want.
Perfectly good. So one of my first questions, I think there is a number of questions that have been posed by audience members and students as well, either online right now or even before the presentation. So one of the things that has actually been talked about is in terms of the challenges that institutions, the financial institutions in India faced, the banking, insurance industry, asset management, wealth management companies, have been in terms of policy decisions, right, that have been made by the government of India and and the regulatory bodies. So I think that is one of the main kind of, I would say, the hurdles that institutions have faced. So I want to take that off the bat in terms of understanding if you think those stipulations and the licensing and the engagement with the government and the bureaucracy that may be associated with that, rightly or otherwise, have you seen any shift in that in the last 30 years as to how the use of technology and the use of the technological innovations that have been sprouting up in the last few years that you mentioned, have those been reduced? And do you see any movement on that front? So we'll start with that, and then we'll get into some of the the more recent advances, whether it is in terms of the India stack and other areas that would be of relevance to many of our audience members.
Yeah, thanks, Ram. I think any government idea is to build an inclusive society, right? So for an inclusive society, you need to have a formal economy. The biggest challenge that India has for us to move from underdeveloped to developing to developed, right? If you have to transform the journey, essential part is that the growth has to come from all of the society, whether it is individual or businesses. We are largely a bottom of the pyramid society. We are largely a MSME segment. And India as a government, whoever comes into the government, the policy is to look at how do I drive the inclusive growth. If I have to drive an inclusive growth, there are four pillars normally a country will look at, right? One is your financial inclusion, including the people financially, provide them an access to banking and financial services, provide them a protection, provide them a pension schemes kind of thing, provide them a health inclusion, the education and skill inclusion, and a social inclusion. We will talk about the first one, which is the financial inclusion, which is the first step towards bringing the citizens into a formal economy. I think the government perspective, there is a progressive policy making in terms of the changes that are brought in by the various governments in India run today have been adapting time to time in terms of various policies. But I think in the rapid development has happened from 2010 to now. In the sense, last 11 years, the policies have been very, very flexible, very open, encouraging the public-private partnerships to come in and also to open up startups. And there are states who opened up, where I stay in Hyderabad, the Telangana has T-Hub, right, which encourages a lot of the startups and fintechs to come up and operate. The policies have become simpler because if you look at ease of doing business, you can set up a company within a very simple, defined timeline, and there is a single window mechanism. I think the government perspective and the RBI, the policy perspective, regulation perspective, I believe the advancements that have taken place in the last 11 years have been very progressive in nature, open, competitive, providing equal opportunity to the organizations to set up and come, and promoting a lot of these adoptions, digital adoptions, whether you call it as PMJDY or UPI. You must have seen all the top Indian political leaders are also talking about it. I think, the idea of the country is to drive the inclusive growth. Idea of the organizations and enterprises is to catch up that game and then create that market which is available, a large market of 1.39 billion people, to make a larger market. I think we are in the right path, and I would see that any of the policy decisions, the regulation changes which RBI adopted in the recent past have been very, very open, and then creating that competitive environment, creating the policies. And let's say take example of KYCs. There are relaxed KYCs now compared to the stringent KYC norms which were there before 2010. And there are electronic KYCs, there are video KYCs available. Payments experience has been externalized to other than the banks, right? The non-banking or the fintech companies are delivering it. I think there are a number of ways we can say that the policy framework and the regulation framework is helping the ecosystem to build and sustain on its own so that the citizens can adopt and then progress.
So when they're talking about the private companies, you gave examples of Telangana. On the other side of the equation are the private companies relying on the government to either help provide tax subsidies, or whether it's in terms of providing land and support, something similar to what was happening in the 90s with setting up the software, or in the 80s where they set up the software export promotion zones. Do you believe that the private companies are still looking up to whether the central government or the state governments to provide those SOPs for them to actually take it to the next level of progression in terms of technological and innovation, and to be able to compete on a global basis?
Yeah, I think the evolution of the IT industry or the fintech revolution that took place from 1990 onwards, now if you see, I think the companies are able to leverage the knowledge base that is there in India, right? So we are a knowledge capital of the world, right? The way it looks today, right? So leveraging that knowledge capital, the intellectual property, building production platforms, creating data centers. I think the entire IT revolution which has come up post 1990, I would say the globalization and then the subsequent the policies and frameworks. I won't see that today. I know each state is competing with other in terms of making up a single window mechanism to start the businesses. And the cloud infrastructure, in fact, the cloud players, it's not about government alone. It's like a public, private, all of them are able to create. So today, if you want to start a business online, I don't think you are gone are the days where we set up the servers, data centers, disaster recovery, availability, and all of that. It's just a question of you subscribe to your cloud. So leverage the cloud computing and cloud capacity and the tools that are available, and then able to start the business quickly. So I was seeing some of the success stories in India, which is small startups and fintechs, and people are able to set up businesses in anywhere ranging from 3 to 6 months time, which was quite agile in terms of able to get the businesses started up. So I would say that we are in a right environment, and there is a progressive across the country, various states competing each other in terms of getting the more business. And because of the talent pool or the knowledge base that India has, leverage that. And I think we are in right state, and mostly, banking financial services sector, I would say with my personal experience, technologically, we are far more ahead of the global countries across, especially if you take payments as a space. I believe we are far, far ahead. So today, who imagined a country with a lot of people on the bottom of the pyramid and villages are able to do transactions through a digital manner, and 4.5 billion transactions a month in the last month only from UPI. And the progress of the transactions is quite huge. The biggest success that India has seen, on my view, is that the literacy and digital literacy are two different aspects. I may not be able to read and write, but the ability of the using a digital smartphone or the digital wares, that watches or glasses or whatever, the wearables, and I think adoption of the Indian citizens, whether it is rural, urban, semi-urban, is phenomenal. I think it's nothing to do with your reading and writing. It's about intellect, and which translates, and even the focus now, most of the companies are looking at building the solutions into the local languages, and the voice based or the expression based, gesture based tools are coming up. You no longer have the digital divide, and also say literacy to non-literacy. I think that's getting slowly, the gap is getting narrowed, and the adoption has been quite impressive.
So you talked about financial inclusion a few times. So I just wanted to come back to that theme and the whole sustainable aspects of it, right? So while there is a general acceptance and adoption of the mobile technology and the use of phones to transact business, and from the vegetable vendors to the farmers to other traders have become very comfortable with the use of that technology. There still seems to be the ability to rely and to trust the systems, and I'm sure that the government of India is through the whole Digital India and other programs are trying to push that, and the banking the unbanked. So do you think we are at a stage where we can say that we are established a sustainable growth of financial adoption and inclusion, or do we? What is the track right now for the next 5 years or so you see that we need to establish so that it becomes more pervasive, and even though the digital divide may have narrowed, but the ability for people to go beyond that, especially the younger generation who are may not have the good internet connectivity or the appropriate infrastructure. What do you think should be done from a sustainable growth perspective and the use of these technologies from a financial standpoint?
Yeah, I think this is a very important topic for me, because I was personally involved in the drive of digital financial inclusion in India way from 2010. See, I have seen the days where there was no data network connectivity in villages. We used to go to a place where we can get a transaction. We used to do transactions on a smart card where the value of the money is stored inside the smart card. And we have seen all of that. But I think what we have seen is with the 2014 onwards, in terms of the Prime Minister Jan Dhan Yojana, Prime Minister Jeevan Jyoti Bima Yojana, Suraksha Yojana, Atal Pension Yojana, all of this, what is giving is a comprehensive protection to the citizen to get included. Okay. So when I say this, what happens in this whole thing is that you get an access to a banking system. Whether you want to save money, whether you want to spend money, whether you want to take a loan, or whether you want to take a cover an insurance, or you want to get a pension scheme. I think the biggest point is that this is a comprehensive package which is being driven none other than from the government of India at the top level. And in fact, this has created close to, I think, 430 million accounts in the country as on date, and with a huge low-cost CASA deposits into the accounts. See, what it translated is it included the larger segment of the population. I would say 80% of the people in India has been included with the drive that the government has run and the ecosystem, whether it is public sector banks, the private sector banks, the regional rural banks, the fintechs, the startups, and many the business corresponding companies, all of them have made a collaborative effort to bring this included. Now, having this included, I would say that one point of time I used to say to the people that the technology that is available at the rural locations is far superior than what you have in cities. Because if you want to do a transaction, you need to go to internet banking, mobile banking, you need to understand user ID passwords, or you have to have a smartphone, and smartphone needs so many things, the data, all that. But we have deployed a Aadhaar-enabled payment systems in the ground in villages where you exactly don't need anything. You just need your biometric, whether it is fingerprint or an iris. And once you have that, and with your Aadhaar number, the JAM Trinity, which we talked about, JAM, Aadhaar, and mobile, every citizen in the villages need not have the phone on their hand. And they were able to come to the shops and do an Aadhaar-based payments, Aadhaar-based transfers, withdrawals, deposits, all of that. So now what's happening is the dependencies of progressing towards technology adoption have been removed with the framework called as JAM Trinity. And where merchant alone needs to have a phone to do it, or a point of sale machine to have it, or a computer to have it, or multiple varieties of doing it, but the citizen need not have, right? So that's a huge thing which you and me do not experience in cities. So the whole point of now the question comes in, how do I become self-driven, right? It's all government disbursement which is going to the villages where the citizens are taking money, and most of the time it's withdrawal only. There's no saving and there's no thing. I think the whole aspect is to create the skill around it, to give the protection to the head of the family so that you have included somebody, he should not be excluded again, right? The effort to include him again is a huge cost to the government or the society at large. So I think the framework is designed well. The technology has started. With the advent of UPI now, it's going into the villages. I think the adoption level, the biggest point is technology we can build, right? The biggest challenge is to bring the adoption into it. I think that place we are superseding with the rest of the world, which in an unimaginable manner. You just take an example of the COVID vaccination that is done with the COVID app. So the amount of adoption that took place in the time that is left, hardly 10 months time, I think probably 12 months time, the adoption is quite amazing. So I think the estimates towards the India at the bottom of the pyramid has got shattered with the type of the learning, the ability that people have in terms of the technology and financial inclusion. I personally was there, and we have contributed. We are servicing close to 100 plus customers in the country on the digital financial inclusion space. I personally can vouch that the amount of progress that the inclusion took place is almost at 80%. And obviously, you will never be able to 100%. You will have people dying and people born again, and then you have the cycle will continue, and you have things like that. I think the reasonable level and the progress has happened, and large financial inclusion worldwide is exclusion is in India, and that gap has been bridged. I think we are able to set that benchmark to the world.
That's really heartening to hear. But so that brings me to the other side of the equation, which is the startup ecosystem, right? And the fintechs. While there is a lot of emphasis on the government and them pushing the direct benefits transfer and then using that as a mechanism for digital adoption, what is going on in the startup space as it relates to, especially in the fintech startup space, as it relates to providing the higher order innovation? While we at one point in time considered, Bangalore and other places as the Silicon capital of the other Silicon capital, if you will, not just the Silicon Valley, but has there actually been a meaningful contribution by the fintech startup companies in India? When I use the word fintech more broadly, in terms of the insurtech and regtech and the entire space of this innovation that is happening, and whether there has been a meaningful, because there are probably 3,000 to 5,000 fintech companies in India, probably the third largest in the world. But then the point is, what kind of innovation and breakthroughs that have been done compared to even the Chinese have got fewer number of fintech companies, but they have done a lot more in terms of pure technological innovations that is impacting commerce and business. How is that? Where do you think people are lacking? I mean, we in India like they say, it's a jugaad in country of jugads, and then they try to manipulate what has been done and to make it slightly better and adapt it. But in the context of what we are talking about, where do you think, or what do you think are the challenges that the fintech startup companies are facing, and what do you think are the technological breakthroughs that you think is likely to happen from the startup ecosystem?
Yeah, I think, see, before we get into the startup ecosystem and their challenges, I think what made these startups and fintechs to boom in India or create that interest required, right? I've seen yesterday somebody starting up a startup at CEO at 19 years of age, and somebody is at 23 years of age. And, lots of innovative ideas are coming, and people are venturing into not jobs, but getting into entrepreneurship and all that. I think very important step that we need to recognize in this whole thing is that what made the fintechs and startups to groom in India, and what will make them sustainable and successful at large. I think the fundamental aspect of the government creating the entire India stack, the philosophy of India stack, whether you take in the area of the taxation, whether you take in the of financial services, the banking and insurance and all those places, traditionally what's happening is there are 4 layers of any technology system. The experience layer, which is the consumer experience, the citizen or the enterprise experience, and the aggregation layer, where you have ecosystem partnership within the society to bring in, to collaborate and build collaborative business models, and then orchestration of that particular data between these things and the servicing. So there are 4 layers. Now, what used to happen traditionally in IT systems that have grown from 1990 to 2010 is more to do with all of them are into one box. Take example of core banking. The entire core banking, the experience part, the aggregation part, the orchestration part, the servicing part, the account opening, servicing, and all of that used to be part of the core banking. What happened in the recent past, whether you take the same thing happens to core insurance systems, the core trading systems, the core systems are able to provide the end-to-end services. So the organizations used to keep the branches and the net banking, mobile banking kind of channels for them to enter. Now what's happened, the revolution is with the startup and fintech thing is externalization of the top 3 layers. You have externalized the experience, externalizing the orchestration, externalizing the aggregation, and servicing remains with the business owners. Like the account remains with the bank, but the payment is externalized. Today, whatever you are seeing apps in the payment space, we don't want to name, but there are n number of apps which will enable you to payments today, is all about experience layer is taken outside the bank. And the framework to externalize that experience and aggregation is created by the Government of India, Reserve Bank of India, and so many policy organizations, whether you take IRDA or all of them. So essentially what happened is that the structure that have been put in place, ability to externalize the entire services, whether it is sales and service, the aggregation layers are like you take the NPCI is an aggregation layer where you have a lot of, between the banks, there are a settlement agency, right? So RTGS is a settlement layer. So this externalization from the bank and then creating a framework and creating a regulation around it opened up the areas for the private companies like fintechs, the startups to innovate things which can go close. If you take example of any of the transactions that are happening today in so-called payment apps, all these transactions are present in, if you go to any of the public sector bank, internet banking, mobile banking, those services, they have much more services than this. But what made the people to adopt to these applications is primarily because of the simplicity and because of moving from a monolith to an intelligent system. We don't want to, the users are being guided rather than he went into the system and then log in, user ID, password, remember so many things, go to this menu, that menu, all this is gone. Today, the system tells you your bill is pending. System tells you, your mobile app tells you that you need to send money to so-and-so. The mobile app tells you there is a shop around you. I think the fintech ecosystem, other than the e-commerce players, which is outside the banking segment, are primarily targeted 3 areas. One is the digital lending space, right? The innovation is happening in digital lending. And the KYC, where intermediate layer, you process the entire digital KYC, whether it is in the form of e-KYC, video KYC kind of things, and account aggregation concept, which again prescribed with the RBI recently given licenses. I think a very well-structured organizational institutionalization of the externalization of services has happened in India. And that's a reason for these fintechs and startups to start something quick along with the digital disruption, which is in the name of the cloud, AI, ML, the conversational bots which have come in place, then your analytics coming to picture. Combination of these two is giving that opportunity for fintechs and startup to start new business. Challenges perspective, the biggest challenge any fintech faces is cash flow, right? And the risk. How do I manage a book, right? These risks, I think some fintechs started learning it very well. Not that all of them, but they have started learning. They lack that part of it. They know technology, they know, they have the idea, they have the wherewithal to set up. But I think what is lacking is the traditional competency in running a business, right? So I think those areas the people are learning. And I'm seeing, especially in the ecosystem around, the challenges in terms of the regulation, risk management, cash flow management, and then I think these are the three, and funding, obviously the investor and funding. So these four areas sees as a large risks or the challenges for these organizations. But I think that's a part of a learning curve for any organization to grow, right? So it will happen. Well, so yeah, that's where I.
So that's a very positive outlook, which is great, and you're kind of very nicely delineated where the private parties and companies are now trying to play, and how the government has kind of enabled that process, which is great. But on the other hand, if I look at the public sector institutions, we have these behemoths like State Bank of India, Punjab National Bank, and others. Especially after the 2017-2018 consolidation, it's become, for all the right or other reasons, there has been a consolidation. But when before the nationalization, right after the nationalization to where we are right now, there has been a little bit of consolidation on one hand, but also there are 10 or 12 or 15 different private banks and other institutions. The mutual funds, the growth has been phenomenal. The wealth management, financial advisory space has been growing as well. The young investors, especially in the age of 18 to 24, 25, their savviness is also growing. So, do you believe that the traditional banking and financial institutions, they are going to feel the heat from these fintech startup companies? Because I still want to kind of focus on that for a second. Whether these startup companies are geared themselves to be able to provide the run for the money to these larger traditional institutions, and what is being done by these larger banks and mutual fund companies and insurance companies as well. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, very good question, because you have large giants who are there, established business, the private sector, public sector. I don't want to name, but essentially we have a lot of them with running the huge legacy and huge customer base. Some of the public sector banks, a lot of customers are inactive in nature. You can say X number of customers, but inactive in nature. Vis-a-vis a small fintech, which is startup with a very niche area, let's say SME funding, right? Or you talk about only a specific closed loop payment, or you talk about a very specific microfinance functionality, right? They are budding into that area and they are getting an entry. But the point is it difficult for the larger organization to create? It is not. The belief is that the traditional businesses are running with a sustainable profit model, right? You have to show profits end of the quarter, end of the year. But the newest fintechs are running on a valuation business, right? Sustainable profits is not, at least the initial days of the fintech, is not the mantra for them. It's about acquisition of the customer. It's about valuation of the customer, creating a value which you can monetize later, right? This is a big challenge. So the legacy organizations thinks that these organizations are not make money, and these organizations think that they cannot deliver at a speed that I can deliver, right? Alone. Let's say if somebody is telling, yesterday I was talking about a fintech which saying 10 minutes I deliver a food at your home. 10 minutes. From the time you click submit, 10 minutes you'll get it. That's a USP. Now what's the model around it? Now the biggest challenge these two things is, there's no doubt some of the fintechs, a few of them, handful, have dented the book for the public sector. Okay, especially in the area of personal loans, credit cards, consumer loans. Okay, and the small segment of SME microfinance loans. These are the areas they have dent and they have taken a large share of the butt. payments is totally taken over by the fintech community. But what is important now, I could see revolution in the public sector and private sector, large private sector in India, is for them to create this neo bank, which is a small fintech kind of a bank, is not a big deal for them. They can create anytime. And in fact, if you see some of the evolutions that have come from large organizations today, they have created those organizations. So it's a journey which is happening where the innovation and agileness and nimbleness is competing with a large organization trying to be nimble with the adoption of the digital technology. So it is important to create a model where the technology is the friend and the technology has given the right choice to refuse, the first choice to refuse, and then get into the manual operation. I think that journey has started with all the large organizations which we could see in the market. All of them have been adopting. Some of them are already done it. Some of them are in the way to do it. I think it's interesting to see how they cope up. But it's essential, the innovative idea and the nimbleness of the fintech, some of them have really grown big. They no longer can be called as a fintech. I don't want to name the organizations per se, but there are organizations who have gone to that state and challenging the larger organization. It's a mix of both. And there are organizations who believe that these organizations will never a threat to them. They are still in the same category. I think you have all sorts of things. But I think we need to wait in next 2 to 3 years, because it's no longer going to be 5-year, 10-year journey from now. It's going to be next 2 to 3 years. You will see a new partners emerging. Some people getting dissolved and some people getting aligned with the thing. And that's a competition spirit in the market, which we all can witness. And we are all trying to see that how do we bridge this gap, balance it out, bring technology front, give that opportunity for the enterprises to leverage that. And that's where we are all involved, and that's where our work is involved.
All right, excellent. So I wanted the last theme of what I wanted to touch on is I see some other questions there as well, is around this conversation around decentralized finance infrastructure, with the use of blockchain and the use of other technologies and smart contracts and others. And that doesn't seem to have made a lot of ripple, at least in the Indian financial services market, while there has been a lot of experimentation and pilots by some of the bigger institutions. What are you seeing in terms of the adoption of or removal of the centralized structure that we have known for centuries, if you will, right? And RBI has been more recently been very vocal about cryptocurrencies on one hand. But I think I wanted to go away from the cryptocurrency conversation, but more talk about the infrastructure in terms of the entire blockchain and creating a decentralized platform for financial institutions. And what have you seen in the market, and what is the pulse, if you will, in the market space? So if you can touch on that.
Yeah, I think the adoption of the blockchain technologies onto the business cases. The biggest very important point for the success is to identify the right use case. See, just because the technology is available, you can't make use of it and make it a profitable business unit out of it. What is important is this technology, the business is first, right? For me to sustain and run a business, is this technology is applicable to me or not? I think the biggest hurdle or a challenge today and the large scale blockchain adoption, it's there in bits and pieces across, is that identifying the right use case. See, identification of the right use case comes from a use case where you need a multi-stakeholder environment, consent-based framework, and you need utmost security for that, and a perpetuality of the transaction or immutability of the transaction, right? That use case is required. Currently in Indian banking system, if you look at it, all the banks are silos. Individual banks, individual systems, individual processes, all of them do interoperability across the banks, right? So they do transactions from bank A to bank B, but that's only related to that transaction. I think there is a theme which is coming up. I don't know when it will happen. Banking as a service. Banks becomes primarily a product and a service company, where they innovate products, business products, and I say product, business products, and services, and become the banking regulator. As a licensed regulator, they give the services within the regulation, and the technology takes over, delivering that to the customer. I think that is a long journey from now in the way we are constructed today, because these are all, we are talking about still individual silos connected by an interoperability. When you are looking at India as a country, as a citizen in the center of it, he has a choice to choose multiple products and services. He need not know from which financial institution he is taking, but he know that this is the terms and conditions and this is the financials that I am going to get it. And that's an open framework which requires to be evolved. I think that's where the blockchain will play a very important role. Today, blockchains are primarily put in places in banking sector, especially where there is a huge interbank transactions happening, like trade finance, right? Exchange of documents takes place, the wage bills takes place, where there is a consent is required. There is a trust is to be established between the players who do not know each other. Like example of trade receivables system, where you wanted to ensure that the bill purchased by an organization is not purchased by another body, right? So all these things are put into a blockchain and then created, especially in the area of the trade, in the area of the receivables area, and in the, especially outside the banking, in the land records. I think the identification of such and cross-border transactions, like example of Ripple in Middle East, right? So essentially, you need an identified use case which will give that business benefit back to it. And technology also, it requires, I think, furthermore in terms of the response time at scale, right? Today, if you look at the UPI transactions happening in a day, we are talking about aspiration of 2025 by 1 billion transactions a day. If you have to deliver that throughput in a day, I think that system is also required to be, So once you have the blockchain in the place, what happens is you don't need an individual. Everybody is a participant in that. You don't have an individual things, and you can see a transaction done today in my book, debited, credited to you. I can see the credit also. Today, I can't see credit happened in your account, except I get an SMS, it's credited, right? If I get it. But otherwise, you can see the good ledger, which is shared across two people. I think the biggest advancement can happen only in the when you have the business case, right return of investment, and also the technology to give the throughput required for the scale that India requires.
So, in some sense, what I'm kind of interpreting from what you're saying is that while an appropriate business use case needs to be created, I also see a sense of caution in terms of how rapidly we are moving into that space. And we are seeing a very long journey for the adoption and acceptance of blockchain in the financial services industry. Is that a fair assessment of what you are
in the
thinking?
newest digital word? Long is not more than a quarter of a year, right? So I think it can happen anytime. It's just that business case has to fit in. So time is not long, means not in years in terms. It's fundamentally the business case, when it will get struck, and then when all the parties come together and create that ecosystem and where they can have a collaborative business model.
And then finally, I just wanted to close the conversation out in terms of talking about how and what young students of business and commerce and people who are studying finance and accounting, what is it that they need to be looking at and focused on, especially in the next 5 to 10 years journey as they are establishing their career? And clearly, these technologies are going to have some impact on their own future of work and future of in terms of their own career. Because an accountant today may be doing certain things may be very different than what an accountant may be doing 5 years from now, and so will a banker. And whether you are in the trading and settlement area, or whether you are managing the operations or establishing your own fintech startup companies, what do you suggest for our young students and for the young generation in terms of what they should be looking at as it relates to their own career in this finance and financial services space?
Your students are as good as my trainees who are joining our company right down the line, next 2 years, 3 years, or next 1 year. I keep saying we interact a lot with our junior associates who join the company, and what we understand is 2-3 aspects an enterprise will look at, any corporate will look at, is that first thing is you need to have passion, right? So you may have, there's nothing like good subject, bad subject. Okay? Every subject is good. Its only question is that whether you like it, you have a passion to do it. So passion is the first one. Okay. Second is the attitude to learn. and a lifelong learning. You have an attitude towards learning, and can you habituate as a lifelong learning? This is a knowledge industry, especially the industry I am in is a knowledge industry. A knowledge industry is knowledge is your capital, right? So you need to keep on checking that, tapping that knowledge, and then making sure that you keep growing and have a lifelong learning. The third enterprises look at is the ownership capabilities. If I take a task, can I get this done? What any boss will look at is that if I assign to this guy, can I be peaceful, right? So I think the ownership aspect of it. I think if these three things are there, right, and most important thing is more than the academic knowledge, it's about the practicality, and the academics is one part of it. We try to learn ideal things in the books, but I think what is practical has a lot of environmental influences around it. What is important is to able to make a judgment of taking the practical consensus, being on the ground, and able to understand and get that maturity required to deliver. I think in all that sense, I don't say that accounts are happening this way. Automation is certain. AI is going to come in, no doubt about it. Okay, the entire, we call it in TCS as Business 4.0 framework, which talks about the cloud, the automation, the agile, and the entire intelligent systems and all that. So what is important is that you cannot stop the disruption, the digital disruption that is happening. New things will keep coming in every time. Right? What is required from you is to have the passion and a continuous learning along with the right attitude for your goals. It's not about only organization, no? It's about your goals and your commitment towards it. And work-life balance, I have seen recent times a big USP that every individual is looking at. I think that is possible when you are able to do within the time frame, right? So I think I would suggest the associates or the young students is to choose your area which you believe that you want to excel, stick to it. Results may not come tomorrow or day after, it will come. But you just need to stick to it, be focused, be passionate about it, and then be positive about it. I think that will make you a desired success, whatever the individual is wishing for.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Malladi. I really truly enjoyed the conversation. I think we need to continue this. But I just want to summarize this conversation. Clearly you have what you're talking about is Advantage India. There is appropriate policy support from the government of India in terms of establishing new forms of payments and digital India, focusing on the rural as well as the semi-urban, urban areas. And while the credit and insurance and investment penetration is growing, the high net worth individuals are also participating in wealth management activities even more so now. And the innovation is continuing to evolve and being adopted by not just the big companies, but also by the fintech startup companies. So while there is a growing demand in India for especially with the rising income and everything else, there is a clear path to the glory of future of India, and the technological revolutions, especially in the financial services world, is going to make it happen. So with those very positive thoughts, I want to thank you again, and it was an absolute pleasure to have you. And we should continue this discussion offline as well. Extremely pleased. Thank you.
It's pleasure talking to you, Ram, and very nice of you for giving me an opportunity. And I'm thankful to you for ability to allow us to share what we have learned. Some of them are in my individual capacity I have shared, some of with my experiences. And thank you so much.